With Donkey Kong Bonanza being one of, if not the biggest exclusive the Nintendo Switch has to offer in its first year, what better time than now to look back at one of Donkey Kong's most groundbreaking adventures, the original Donkey Kong Country, released for the Super Nintendo in 1994. We want to thank you for joining us on this banana-filled adventure today as we look back at the story of one of gaming's biggest icons, one of the biggest and most respected game studios of all time, and one of the greatest platform games the 16-bit era had to offer. One of gaming's earliest icons. When it comes to the early days of gaming, Pac-Man is arguably the first gaming superstar that we would have. However, right behind Pac-Man is Donkey Kong. Donkey Kong is one of the most important video games in history, and it was released in 1981 to universal acclaim. The interesting thing is, at the time, this game was made to help get rid of a bunch of unsold inventory of another Nintendo arcade game, Radar Scope, which had been a massive failure. Nintendo of America wanted another game that could utilize those Radar Scope cabinets, and the story goes that all of the other main game designers were preoccupied, so it fell to Shigeru Miyamoto, the most famous video game designer of all time. Although, back in 1980, he was just a smaller cog in the Nintendo machine, this would be his chance to make his very own game. At first, he had the idea of a Popeye game, but when licensing became an issue, he pivoted. Popeye became Jumpman, who would later go on to become Mario. Olive Oil became Pauline, who has recently made a comeback thanks to games like Super Mario Odyssey and Donkey Kong Bonanza. And then we have Bluto, who became Donkey Kong. The rest, as they say, is history. Donkey Kong became a massive global hit in the arcade and would be released for the majority of home computers and video game systems of the early to mid-1980s. We would love to hear your memories of playing the original Donkey Kong for the first time. Did you play it in the arcade or one of the home versions? Before we get to Donkey Kong, we have to look at Rare, the studio who would make the game. The Rare that many of us know and love started back in the early 80s as Ultimate Play the Game, where they had a string of hits in the UK as well as other parts of the world. They focused on the ZX Spectrum, which was insanely popular in the UK in the early 80s. A few of their earlier hits include the likes of Saberwolf, Jetpack, Attic Attack, and Night Lore, these games being playable on the fantastic compilation Rare Replay for the Xbox One. Despite the success that they had with the ZX Spectrum, that computer was popular in the UK and they wanted a bigger global appeal. This led to them getting their hands on a Famicom, and due to the improved processing power, no loading required cartridges, and a more global appeal, Ultimate Play the Game would change focus and concentrate on the home console market, which was starting to grow, and they would also change their name to Rare. In the early days of Rare, they mostly focused on producing licensed games. They made the WWF wrestling games for the NES and Game Boy, games based on the likes of Nightmare on Elm Street, Beetlejuice, Sesame Street, Spider-Man, and various TV game shows, to name just a few. They were very prolific on the NES and Game Boy in the 80s and early 90s. Rare would also develop a handful of titles for the Sega Mega Drive as well. The most famous games that Rare produced during this time was the Battletoads series, clearly inspired by the popularity of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles series. Battletoads was a massive success, although it is probably responsible for many parents having to buy additional controllers due to their kids smashing theirs in frustration due to how difficult the Battletoads games were. Rare had proven that they knew Nintendo hardware very well, and it was because of this that Nintendo went to Rare with a very important task. Nintendo wanted Rare to reboot the Donkey Kong series for their 16-bit powerhouse, the Super Nintendo, which at the time had become the #1 game console in the world, and Nintendo wanted something big to help keep those sales going and be something that could be another shot to the jaw in the battle against Sega. What are your favorite games from the pre-Donkey Kong era Rare? Let us know of any hidden gems that you feel deserve more attention from Rare's back catalog. Donkey Kong was very popular in the 1980s. The game would be ported to every system imaginable, plus there were sequels in Donkey Kong Jr., Donkey Kong 3, and the educational title Donkey Kong Math. There was also merchandise and a bunch of Donkey Kong Game & Watch games, some of which are seen as real collector's items these days. However, after Donkey Kong 3, which would come to the NES in 1986, the Donkey Kong series would lie dormant for the better part of a decade. Donkey Kong Jr. showed up in Super Mario Kart, but as far as solo Donkey Kong games went, the Big Ape was on a sabbatical, eating a lot of bananas. That is, until Nintendo decided that they wanted to bring Donkey Kong back, and they wanted him back in a big way. 1994 was a massive year for Donkey Kong, as there were two major releases. In the summer of 1994, Nintendo themselves would publish Donkey Kong for the Nintendo Game Boy. This was a remake of the original Donkey Kong, which started out just like the arcade classic, before opening up to something much larger. It was a huge hit, and also one of the key games to showcase Nintendo's Super Game Boy add-on for the Super Nintendo. Often referred to as Donkey Kong 94, this game is regarded as one of the greatest Donkey Kong games of all time. It would lay the groundwork for the Mario vs. Donkey Kong series that was popular on the Game Boy Advance, Nintendo DS, and even to this day, thanks to the Nintendo Switch remake of the original Mario vs. Donkey Kong game. While Nintendo was hard at work on Donkey Kong for the Game Boy, they had Rare working just as hard on revamping Donkey Kong for the 90s. Donkey Kong would have to compete with the likes of Sonic the Hedgehog, Super Mario, and a slew of other 2D attempted mascot characters that were prevalent at this time, and to say that Rare delivered is a massive understatement. Rare spent a great deal of money to purchase a Silicon graphics workstation, which would allow them to create state-of-the-art looking 3D models and then shrink them down to make them sprites for the Super Nintendo. It was a very expensive piece of kit, but their gamble more than paid off, as when the first screenshots of what they were doing with their revamp of Donkey Kong were revealed, people lost their minds. In late 1994, the gaming world was getting ready for the next generation of game consoles. Sega with its Sega Saturn and Sony with their PlayStation were telling the world that the next generation was here and that 3D was the way things were going. Granted, gaming would make the jump to 3D, but Donkey Kong Country, thanks to the amazing visuals, showed that there was still some life left in the 16-bit Super Nintendo. The Silicon graphics workstation allowed Rare to pre-render all of the graphics for Donkey Kong Country. This led to amazing-looking characters and backgrounds that packed tons of details into them. It is honestly not an exaggeration to say that, at the time Donkey Kong Country was released, there was no better-looking game for the Super Nintendo, and you could make the argument that there was no better-looking game anywhere else either. What were your thoughts the first time you saw the impressive visuals of Donkey Kong Country? Nintendo was already remaking or reimagining Donkey Kong themselves, which meant Rare had to do something radically different, and that is exactly what they did. This is a much cooler and more modern Donkey Kong for the 90s. Made evident right from the start, we see Cranky Kong, who is the original Donkey Kong from the arcade, playing an old-timey record player before being kicked to the curb by our new Donkey Kong, complete with a CD boombox. It sets the tone for what is to come with our new hip Donkey Kong. Not only is this a younger Donkey Kong, but he is also joined by a buddy, Diddy Kong. Diddy Kong is smaller and is rocking a Nintendo cap, which is a lot of fun. To this day, Diddy Kong is a mainstay Nintendo character. Granted, he may not be a top-tier character on the same level as the likes of Mario, Link, and Samus, but he has been a main character in the majority of Donkey Kong games since this, as well as appearing in most Mario spin-offs such as the Mario Kart series and the various Mario sports titles. Two more characters were added to the roster in Funky Kong, a cool surfer-looking Kong who allows you to fly between the different stages. The rather busty Candy Kong is something of a love interest for Donkey Kong, who is there to help you save your game. Perhaps Candy Kong's biggest claim to fame is her rather interesting design in the Donkey Kong Country animated series, which aired for the first time in 1997. DK and Diddy would not be on this journey alone, as Rare introduced animal buddies that they could ride on while they were on this wild adventure. Rambi the Rhino, who can plow through enemies and crash through walls to find hidden areas. Espresso the Ostrich, who can use his wings and his basketball shoes to run fast and fly for a short time. Enguarde the Swordfish, who can take out enemies and speed dash forward. We also have Winky the Frog, who can jump super high, finding hidden areas and helping with some tricky platforming. And last, but by no means least, we have Squawks the Parrot, whom DK and Diddy cannot ride, but he lends a helping hand by carrying a lantern to light darkened areas. It was not just DK's family and friends who got fleshed out in Donkey Kong Country. Donkey Kong needed a new adversary to go up against, and that led to Rare creating King K. Rool, a rather portly crocodile who is the king of the Kremlings. King K. Rool has stolen all of Donkey Kong's bananas, and DK and Diddy are on a quest to get them back and put King K. Rool back in his place. The Kremlings were just a ton of fun, offering many different variations in the various levels, as well as some larger and very impressive-looking boss characters too. Rare had well and truly outdone themselves with this reimagining and reboot of Donkey Kong, and many of the decisions that Rare made with Donkey Kong are still a part of the series to this very day. We would love to know what you feel is the single biggest thing that Rare added to the world of Donkey Kong. There was a ton of debate in the schoolyard, the office, the arcade, the local video game store, and in most houses that were video game households, in regards to who was the best, Sega or Nintendo. An argument could be made for both their 16-bit offerings, but when it came to the visuals and the audio, Donkey Kong Country was like nothing else we had seen before. The level of imagination here as Rare brought this new Donkey Kong world to life is just staggering. The Gorilla Glacier of the game is arguably the peak of the visuals of Donkey Kong Country, with levels that start with a little bit of snow turning into a full blizzard by the end, a fantastic-looking treetop village, and creepy caves, to name just a bit of the variety. In addition to this, you start your adventure in a traditional jungle area, but Donkey Kong Country also has forests, underwater areas, mines, and even a factory. In addition to having a great deal of variety, the animation in the game is nice and smooth as well. It has been said over the years that Nintendo wanted Rare to make Donkey Kong Country as smooth as Sega's version of Aladdin, which was greatly applauded for its visuals and animation. Rare more than lived up to that very tough task. The characters have a ton of personality, from very naughty looking at the camera with his goofy face when he is hit, to the big barrel-bodied Clump Kremling, shrugging off Diddy Kong when he tried to cartwheel through him. The charm that this game offered was just off the charts. In many ways, it was like you were playing through a Saturday morning cartoon. It was not just the visuals that blew people away. Donkey Kong Country also has an amazing soundtrack. It is funky when it needs to be, anxiety-inducing during tenser stages, and even more chill tracks for the underwater sections. The main driving force of the music was the very talented composer David Weiss, who, along with Evelyn Novakovic and Ronan Beanland, truly created one of the best music scores of the 16-bit era. Many people consider the Jungle Hijinks song to be the Donkey Kong theme, and it has been prominently used to this day in most Donkey Kong games. The music was so well done that the soundtrack of a new Donkey Kong game always has people interested in what it is going to sound like. The most recent Donkey Kong game, Donkey Kong Bonanza, had music play a key part in the overall experience. This all dates back to the incredible score that Donkey Kong Country had. Okay, here's a challenge for you. What do you feel is the most important piece of music from the Donkey Kong series? Be sure to let us know in the comments section. It would be so easy to say that when you strip away the amazing visuals, the charming characters, and the awesome soundtrack, that you are left with an average platformer. But that is not the case at all. Donkey Kong Country still holds up to this day and is a ton of fun to play. To start with, both Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong offer different gameplay styles. Donkey Kong is a little slower, but he's heavier and stronger, meaning he can barrel through most enemies as well as slam the ground. Diddy, on the other hand, is faster, can jump farther, but his cartwheel attack cannot defeat heavier enemies, meaning he has to rely on jumping on their heads. Speaking of DK and Diddy playing differently, Donkey Kong Country offers you two different two-player modes. You can play the game cooperatively, working together to make it to the end, or you can play competitively, where you try to see who can make it to the end of the stage the fastest. While at first glance it may look like a typical 2D platformer, this is a far more challenging game than you may expect. If you are playing solo, you control both Diddy and DK, switching between them with the select button. If you take a hit, you lose that character until you find a DK barrel, a fun nod to the original Donkey Kong arcade game. If you only have one Kong, it is a one-hit kill, meaning you either restart the stage or from a checkpoint if you made it to one. The controls are nice and tight, so most of the time when you die, it's because of something you did, not because of the game. There is plenty of platforming and defeating enemies at play in Donkey Kong Country. However, there is a ton of variety here. You could easily argue that there is as much variety here as there is in the epic Super Mario world. Some levels will have DK and Diddy needing to climb or swing on vines. There are barrels that you can blast from, and there are many hidden areas in each stage as well. In addition to this, you have swimming levels and levels that see you ride a minecart, which, for many people, are the most challenging stages in the game. You even have a stage where you have to turn the lights on to keep the enemies at bay, and just when you think you have everything figured out, the game will throw a little curveball your way to keep you on your toes. As well as hidden areas in the game, there are tons of collectibles, something the series would become known for. For every 100 bananas, you get an extra life. You can also get extra lives by finding balloons hidden around the levels and by finding the letters that spell out Kong. If you come across 3 animal tokens, you will enter a bonus stage where you have to collect as many tokens as you can before the timer runs out. Playing as the animal buddies was always a lot of fun, and to get the chance to play as them without DK or Diddy on their back was a blast. Overall, there are over 30 stages spread across different areas of the game. While beating the stages is the main goal, finding all of the secrets and the secret areas is the way to get the most out of the game. Many players will have to replay levels a few times to fully explore them and make sure that they have done everything that they can inside of that level. Each area has a boss battle for you to encounter before you can move on to the next area, with each boss requiring a few hits before they are seen off. These bosses have patterns that the player needs to learn, which range from being pretty easy to really tricky in their design. It all comes to a head with a fight against that big banana stealer, King K. Rool. This is famous for having a fake-out ending where the player thinks that they have won, only for it to be a trick and King K. Rool coming back for one last fight. For a 2D platformer, Donkey Kong Country really encourages the player to explore the levels. To fully complete the game, you need to get 101%. This means you need to get the collectibles, find the secret areas, and of course, beat the game. Doing this will get you a secret ending. It is very impressive just how much gameplay and replay value there is in this game. To say that Donkey Kong Country was a massive hit is a huge understatement. It sold millions of copies, and by the time the Nintendo 64 came along to replace the Super Nintendo, Donkey Kong Country stood tall as the third best-selling game for the system. As well as millions of copies sold, Donkey Kong Country received universal acclaim and won many different awards. 1994 was a big year for Donkey Kong, but that was just the start. In 1995, Rare would release a sequel, Donkey Kong Country 2: Diddy Kong's Quest, which took place right after the events of Donkey Kong Country, with DK getting ape-napped, resulting in Diddy having to team up with a new Kong, Dixie Kong. For many people, Donkey Kong Country 2 is the best in the series, but that is all down to personal preference. Donkey Kong Country 2 would wow Super Nintendo owners in November of 1995, but earlier in that same year, Donkey Kong would return to the Game Boy with the spin-off series Donkey Kong Land. The Donkey Kong Land games were a fun, scaled-back version of Donkey Kong Country for the Game Boy, and in 1996 and 1997, we would get a Donkey Kong Land 2 and 3 for the Nintendo Game Boy. While not as good as the console games, these were fun platformers in their own right that had the spirit of the Donkey Kong Country games. Also in 1996, with the Nintendo 64 being on many gamers' Christmas lists, Nintendo was not kicking the Super Nintendo to the curb just yet, as in November, Rare would bring their final entry to the Donkey Kong Country saga, Donkey Kong Country 3: Dixie Kong's Double Trouble. In carrying on the tradition from the last game, Diddy was now missing and Dixie was the star, where she was joined by the baby, Kiddy Kong. While a solid platformer in its own right, many fans had a hard time getting behind Kiddy Kong. Still, for those who were not yet jumping to the Nintendo 64, Rare and Nintendo made sure that they had one last big hurrah on their beloved Super Nintendo. Rare went all in with the Nintendo 64 and was just as prolific as Nintendo itself when it came to the best software the system had to offer. Rare would give us 2 games in the Donkey Kong universe for the Nintendo 64. 1997's Diddy Kong Racing is regarded as one of the best kart racers of all time, with many people preferring this to Mario Kart 64. They would also release Donkey Kong 64, which takes place in the same universe as the Donkey Kong Country games, and for many people is a full-on successor to the Donkey Kong Country series. Donkey Kong Country was such a massive hit that the game would be re-released twice. In 2000, Rare would release Donkey Kong Country for the Nintendo Game Boy Color. While the visuals and sound are greatly downgraded for the more limited hardware, this is a very impressive port. It contains the full game as well as several new features, including 2 bonus game modes in Crosshair Cranky, a shooting gallery game, and Funky's Fishing, a fishing minigame. There's also a sticker book with hidden stickers in various levels for you to find, and what is neat about this is that the idea was that these were there so you could print them out with the Game Boy printer. In 2003, Rare and Nintendo would once again go to the Donkey Kong Country well, releasing Donkey Kong Country for the Game Boy Advance. The increased power of the Game Boy Advance resulted in a very well-done port of the game. There are graphical and sound differences to the original, however, this is a fantastic version of the game. To be fair, this was released before the Game Boy Advance SP, meaning the graphics possibly look like they do in order to combat the fact that the original Game Boy Advance did not have a backlit screen. This version is more cinematic, offering cutscenes and some fun extras, such as Cranky Kong trash-talking bosses once they are beaten. In addition to Funky's Fishing, there is now a Candy Kong Dance Studio minigame as well. In June 2010, during Nintendo's presentation at E3, Reggie Fils-Aimé made an announcement that Donkey Kong fans had been longing to hear, and that was, not only was Donkey Kong back, but this new game was in fact Donkey Kong Country Returns. Donkey Kong Country Returns was released for the Nintendo Wii in 2010 and was a huge hit. Now developed by Retro Studios, fans loved the game. It looked great, had awesome music, and it was super challenging as well. It was a fantastic new take on a beloved platforming series for those who grew up with Donkey Kong Country, and something exciting for younger fans who were getting their first taste of Donkey Kong action. Donkey Kong Country Returns, like the original Donkey Kong Country, would see 2 re-releases, first for the Nintendo 3DS in 2013, and then in 2025 for the Nintendo Switch. Before the Nintendo Switch remaster of Donkey Kong Country Returns in 2025, Retro Studios would unleash what many people consider to be the best game to bear the Donkey Kong Country name, and that is Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. This was released for the Nintendo Wii in 2014 and would get an enhanced version for the Nintendo Switch in 2018. In 2026, Nintendo released Donkey Kong Bonanza for the Nintendo Switch 2, and it was a massive hit, selling a ton of copies and getting huge amounts of praise, with some media outlets giving it a perfect score. The thing is, we do not get to Donkey Kong Bonanza without Rare taking a chance and revamping Donkey Kong the way it did all the way back in 1994 with Donkey Kong Country. Thanks for joining us today as we took a vine swing down memory lane, looking at the fantastic game that is Donkey Kong Country and the massive impact that it made on Nintendo and the gaming industry. We would love to hear your thoughts on Donkey Kong Country in the comments section down below. Bye-bye.